You'll find that a lot of people just won't take risk anymore because the setbacks define them. And so they just kind of live this very play it safe life, not awesome at all. And for me personally, journaling has been key. Talking about behavior modifications, behavior changes. Like, I'm sure there are patterns that you do that you're not even aware of. This concept of reading, writing, and reflection to help get leaders better. It's something that's worked for me in the military. It's worked for a bunch of military leaders too. So if I can break outside of the military and start sharing that with people like your listeners, it's something that I'm looking forward to doing. It was one of my captains, and they're like, "Sir, there's been a really bad accident. It looks like Lieutenant Haley Hodgson, who'd only been in the unit for a year, looks like she's dead."
You're listening to the Real Business Connections Network. Real Business Connections Network. Powered by Balbert Marketing, LLC. Subscribe now and check us out at realbusinessconnections.com. Enjoy the show.
So, Joe, your work has been endorsed by some kick-ass people like General Stanley McChrystal, but we'll get there. Why'd you get into the military in the first place?
So it's actually so I don't know if I've ever told this origin story before, and I was actually thinking about it this morning because I just officially retired on paper a couple weeks ago, but next weekend is my actual retirement ceremony. So I was thinking about what to talk about. But I grew up, my mom was a nurse, my dad was an electrician, and my grandfather served in the Marine Corps in World War II, did the island hopping campaign, was in, specifically Iwo Jima is one that he was always talking about. And then my uncle also went in the Marine Corps, and he was an aviator. He did 20 years. And so that was like in the back of my mind growing up. And I would always visit my cousins, for like short little vacations. And it seemed like that community was really amazing. People just always hanging out, people always grilling out. So I assume that's what military was about. This is prior. This is
a big grill out party. Yeah.
Yeah. This was prior to 9/11 too. So,
sure.
My junior, senior year of high school was still trying to figure stuff out. And we had a party one night, underage drinking, which never happens in high school. And somebody, came back from basic training and was telling stories about it. And I was like, man, this is really cool. Like, everybody's showing this person respect and reverence, and he looks great. He looks different from, how he looked before he went to basic training. And so all of a sudden that just planted a seed. And the next thing you know, I went to a military college, was there for 4 years, signed a 3-year Army ROTC scholarship, and then, went in 2003. And I was just going to do a few years. That was it. Especially once you experience combat, that kind of changes things a little bit. But I ended up falling in love with it and ended up staying for 20. Deployed several times to Iraq and Afghanistan, and got to serve with a lot of amazing people and got to learn a lot about myself along the way.
I already have so many questions, and we'll get into what you learned about yourself and some of the things you've discovered. But you mentioned how you're retiring.
Right.
First off, thank you for your service. That goes without saying. What did that moment feel like when you actually, like, on paper and made a decision that you're retiring from the forces?
Oh man, Ben, it was crazy because you have this identity that you hold on to, for 20 years. Like, it was very easy to go somewhere and people would say, "What do you do?" Say, "Well, I'm in the military." And then you say, "Thank you for your service." It's like a little dance that we do, but it was really cool to be a part of it and to be a part of a team. But I started and I adopted this persona, that a military leader acts a certain way. Like, we were joking around right before you hit the record button, and you asked me, like, do military guys dance? And I was like, no. But like, you start doing things, you watch TV shows, you go to movies, you drink beer, you dress a certain way. And so this persona becomes really a part of you. And then when I got into writing and reflecting and reading a lot, I really started diving into the hero's journey. The philosophy, the guide path that Joseph Campbell talked about and wrote extensively about in Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in that process, I started realizing that there was like a writer within me emerging. It was, I felt it coming up, and I was at it for years. I was like pushing it down. Like people would
Mm.
ask me, what do I do for fun? And I would say, I run, I work out, I drink beer, I party. And I would never tell anybody that actually I enjoy sitting down with a good book and, reading a little bit and then going to write.
It's a lot
But
cooler to say you kick butt for fun than you sit and you read, in on the
yeah,
couch,
yeah. So I started like following the steps of the hero's journey, and that overlaid on top of my journaling, I realized that I was being called to do this other thing with my life, not necessarily stay in the military, because I could have stayed in for another 10, maybe even 15 years. I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. And so, uh, I just felt this thing, and all of a sudden the thing that I enjoyed every day, the military, that changed. Like while I still liked going to work, it didn't have the same fulfillment
Talk
that
about
it
that. Talk
yeah,
about
that
that.
that it used to have. Yeah, so like I used to get excited about going to work and doing military stuff all the time. And then as I started realizing that like something else inside of me was calling me to go a different direction in my life, all of a sudden the military thing, started draining me. There were aspects of the job that I absolutely loved, but I found myself getting burnt out like way quicker than I used to, a lot less energy than I used to. I was putting on weight, even though I was, working out 5 days, 6 days a week. And so all the signs were there, all the signals were there, that it was time to do something different. And then, personally, my son was going into high school this year, and if I would have stayed in, it would have been 3 high schools in 4 years. Would
Mm.
have most likely been his future. So all those things combined and listening to those signals, which is I think is a key point for your listeners. All those things combined made me make that decision. Now, when I made that decision and when I signed the paper and said I'm retiring, that was the scariest moment I've had in a long time. And all the way up until recently, super scared. Like what am I going to do? I've been used to we joke around living in Shawshank prison for the last 20 years. And now I'm on the outside, like red. Like, what am I going to do with my life? And so, saying you're a writer is not, it's not a guaranteed paycheck. It's not a guarantee at all. And so, yeah, so there's still a little bit of fear with, this path I'm pursuing now. But that being said,
Mm.
like, something Erin Wade, I just interviewed her. She was the founder and former CEO of Homeroom, a mac and cheese restaurant that became like this huge cultural phenomenon. And she was saying that her worst day working in a restaurant was better than her best day working as a lawyer. And so I kind of feel that way. Like I have tons of energy. I'm working out a lot. I'm writing a lot. I'm reading a lot. And like life is good right now.
And you mentioned you in it. Is that on your podcast from the Green Notebook podcast?
Yes. Yeah. It's actually this weekend's episode that's coming out.
And that'll be out by the time this comes out, so that'll be
Oh,
perfect.
perfect.
You've
Yeah.
had like some killer guests like Ryan Holiday. I think I saw James Patterson. While we're on the topic, talk a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah. So the podcast, a buddy of mine, when I got back from Afghanistan in 2020, we were sitting out back drinking beer. If you'll notice that a lot of these stories, a lot of these ideas, it
You're
begins with
drinking a lot of beer.
drinking a lot of beer. Yeah. So, buddy and I were sitting down and he's like, hey, I was like, what do you want to do? And he was telling me that he wants to get into, being an Audible, on Amazon. Like he wants to narrate audiobooks. And I was like,
Mm.
well, how about this? How about we launch a podcast under From the Green Notebook? You host, I'll co-host, and like I'll give you a body of work and you can use my platform. And he said, sure. So we launched the podcast, got a couple huge guests right out the gate. And then it's a lot of work, as you know. And so, like this is my passion. It wasn't his and that's okay. And so he was like, I'm out. And that was like 8 episodes in. And I think the episode coming out this weekend is episode 123. So, it apparently became my passion. So that's the origin story of that one.
Well, congrats on that. 1, 2, 3. That's a great number, by the way, too. I like that. So I know
Thanks.
we're jumping around a lot, but I like to go in the direction that I feel is right. And we copped around, but let's go back to some of the things you learned in the military. And I could honestly use your advice, and I know the listener might as well. I have a unique situation for me. So the first time ever I teared my rotator cuff, for anyone who doesn't know or is listening to the audio, it's basically the connection tissue in your shoulder. So things like lifting my arm to my side, above my head, general functions are really difficult for me right now. And leading up to it, a lot of the listeners know I hired a personal trainer, been working out a year, best shape of my life in my 30s, feeling great, and now I'm hurt. Now, I'm not asking necessarily personal advice unless you have advice for recovery. I'd listen to that too. You have setbacks all the time, even when you're doing planning, even when you're practice, even when you're prepared. I'm sure setbacks occur. And I'm just curious, like in your experience in a military mindset, when a setback like an injury or a setback like something goes away that was unexpected and you've been building up to this moment, has that happened to you? And what the heck do you do?
Okay. First of all, everything I'm about to say, Ben, is like, it's easy for you and I to sit here and talk about it now.
Yeah.
But when you're going through the setback, it is emotionally agonizing. It sucks. It's horrible. And before I say like what I'm going to say, this is where journaling for me is really important. So, you've been working really hard. You're in the best shape of your life. You tear your rotator cuff. Now you've fallen back a couple paces, right? Writing about that every day, right? Like writing about, your daily habit of journaling, eventually your rotator cuff is going to heal. Eventually you're going to be back to where you were before the tear. And what's really cool is you can go back and look in your notebook and see those really dark days where you're like, man, I'm not going to make it. Like this sucks. All that time wasted, whatever. And then you see where you're at today and you're like, man, if I can do that with a torn rotator cuff, then this other thing that's happening right now, it's the same thing. I'll get through this too. So it's a really good tool, at least it has been for me on building resilience. So setbacks. I have learned over time that when you have a setback or you fail at something, you have three outcomes. Either one, it's going to defeat you. You're just like, this sucks. I'm not working out anymore. You're going to gain a couple 100 pounds. You're just going to get angry. And then this is going to be like the bitter Ben Albert show. Cause you're just like, this is horrible. Right. Two is that it's going to define you. So like you're the guy who tore his rotator cuff and quit working out. And you're like, I have bad luck. This sucks. This is just terrible. This always happens to me. And then the third one is it develops you. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the journaling habit of using this setback to be able to grow from it, get better and build resilience. And so in the military, it's a lot of times because, it's an up and out system. And I'm not talking about combat. I'm talking about, just training environments, but it's an up and out system. And you're really worried about performance all the time. But if you're constantly training, constantly doing things, you're constantly making mistakes. And so, as a leader, the one thing that I was always talking about was that mistakes are just data points. That is, failures are just data points. Setbacks are just data points. And you learn something from it each and every time. And then we just take what we learn, we analyze it, we look at how we can incorporate those lessons into the next iteration, and then we move forward with that. And so that's like wisdom that came much later in my career and life. But earlier in my 20s and mid to early 30s, like, man, setbacks sucked. But it's that resilience, it's a muscle that you end up building over time. And you'll find that a lot of people just won't take risk anymore because the setbacks define them. And so they just kind of live this very play it safe life that's not awesome at all. And they're not doing the things that they really want to do because they're so worried of failure. So I definitely think that when you do have setbacks, look for ways for it to develop you to get better the next time, or to overcome it. Speaking of physical fitness, I told you I gained like 20 pounds when I was in Europe. Could have been the
Yeah.
beer. We're going to go back to that again.
It's always a beer.
It's always the beer. Yeah, it could have been the beer and pretzels, but it was stress. It was my cortisol levels were super high. And it was like I was very fit when I got into that position. And just to, see my body every day and just, be like, man, this sucks. This is terrible. Just that one workout at a time, that one day at a time, those compounding habits. You were talking to me before we hit record about one of your past guests of, doing things in the dark so you get better about doing them in the light. And I just think it's so important, when you do have some sort of setback, is to just get back in the dark again and just keep chipping away. Just keep making progress. It's so important.
You're entirely right. And a quick plug, because you mentioned it, Anthony Trucks. We'll put a link in the show notes. He's been a guest on this podcast. But in your hero's journey, I mean, you talked about putting on a little bit of weight. That was kind of a compound effect of a lot of choices, stress, things like that. I don't necessarily want you to say anything that's sealed that you can't talk about, but were you ever in a situation that wasn't like a compound struggle? It was just suddenly something happened and immediately you had to react, and like tearing something or hurting something, or you get a phone call and someone's breaking up with you. Like, we need to immediately be our best selves or else we might look like a fool. Have you in your journey been in those situations much?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, and without getting too much into the specifics, on August 1st, 2023, my phone was just blowing up. I was in a meeting, and so I picked it up and then, hey, what's going on? And it was one of my captains, and they're like, sir, there's been a really bad accident. And it looks like, Haley Hodgson, Lieutenant Haley Hodgson, who'd only been in the unit for a year, looks like she's dead. And so, man, and I knew Haley. I was close with Haley. And, the news of that it was like somebody taking a sledgehammer and just slamming me in the stomach. And when something like that happens, especially in the military, there's an investigation. Family members are notified. There was a lot of people in the organization that were very close with her, and so, in that moment where you as an individual like just want to break down and cry, which is it happened several times. You're also the leader of this organization, and the organization is going to go in the direction that you lead it. And so I found myself having to, muscle this internal strength and lead the organization through it, which I think we did a pretty good job of. But yeah, those were some of the hardest days I had in my leadership, my leadership journey was not only, with myself, but with the organization. And then also, having to make those phone calls to the family. But like so many things came out of that, that were positive after the fact. But yeah, I mean, that's just one example of, that life, what we do is dangerous work, and, things like that will happen. And you cannot let something like that completely destroy you, because you have 499 other people looking at you, wondering what you're going to do.
It's powerful, Joe. And I want to, with empathy, highlight, and I might misquote you, but you said something like, I think we did a pretty good job of. And to me, I'm hearing even people operating at a super high level as a team that are trained, perfectionism's a problem, right? Are we ever going to do things exactly perfect? Like, sometimes doing the best we can is what we need to do as a leader.
Yeah, no. And that's the thing is, sometimes perfect is the enemy of action. And you try to get something perfect. You try to, think through it, and this is what I need to do next. And, you make to-do list and you war game it, and you try to get second, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. But sometimes you just got to act. And like I said, you're not going to get it right. But the reverse of that, the reverse of the reverse of that is inaction. you're completely paralyzed because you're so worried about getting things perfect. And so, every day, like, in that particular situation, every day was doing what I thought was best. And then, you know, after like doing an internal after action review with either myself or my team to see if we were on the right track, for with how we were handling that emotionally, how we were handling, um, from a training aspect, and then how we were handling it from, being able to move forward and get better, after that event.
Mm, so powerful. Wow. So, for the listener, people ask like where I find my guests. It's generally three categories. It's people that I already know really well. It's people that I'm learning from that I've already read their books and this and that, and it's people that I still want to learn from. So I'm learning about you on the spot, Joe. And if someone already knows everything about you, they're like, "Oh, this Ben guy's an idiot." But a lot of listeners might not know you yet. And what I'm curious about is, so you're in the military and you're journaling, you're writing. When does that become like a business model? When does that become something that you're advocating for other military leaders, other business leaders? Like, when does journaling become something that you're talking about to other people?
Oh man. So I think it was, it was funny, like I was writing a lot, and it was whatever I was feeling, in the moment. And I was sitting down having coffee with a friend in, I think it was December of 2020. May have been 21. I don't know. Everything's kind of running together. And
Yeah.
and she was like, a lot of what you write about is reading, writing, and reflection. And I was like, yes, that's it. Those are the things that get me fired up. And so shortly after that, worked on a project, with my friend Cassie Crosby, called My Green Notebook: Know Thyself Before Changing Jobs. And we published this book with the idea being that in the military, we are constantly changing jobs every 1 to 2 years. And you're learning stuff along the way, but when you finish a job on Friday and you start a new one on Monday, it doesn't really give you a lot of time for, to absorb all those lessons learned. And so, the purpose of this book is it's 30 days. It's about it's one leadership attribute or skill a day. And there's two questions. There's one you do in the morning, one you do in the evening. And it's just a tool to allow you
Mm.
to capture the experiences. And so that was that. And then as I was going through command, I realized, the last 2 years, how important journaling was to the things that I was doing in command. And so as I'm going through that at that moment, I'm like doubling down on it. I'm like, yes, this is good. This works. And then I've become, an advocate, probably an outspoken advocate for it ever since.
Let's talk about some of the examples, because I know I have female friends and they've been journaling since they were 6 years old. And I've got some male friends, and honestly, guy or girl, it goes across the board. I've got some friends that are like, that sounds kind of cheesy and lame and gay and stupid. Like, why would I do that? What are some examples of like macho dudes or great women leaders that are doing this cheesy journaling thing, and it's actually delivering results? Like, it actually isn't lame. It's something that a lot of us, if not all of us, should be doing.
Yeah, so I would say that, one of the hardest things that we have to really do in life is to know thyself.
Mm,
And it's like not a modern problem. Like if you were to go back to the temple at Delphi, one of the dictums written above the entrance was know thyself. And so, this has been a human problem. Even Socrates kind of talked about how we walk around, with surface level knowledge of ourself. And it's really important to dive in and ask those questions of ourselves. And so, I saw it throughout my time in the military too. You would have leaders who, um, you know, I'm going to back up a little bit, Ben.
please, yeah, take your time,
I'm going to talk about myself.
please.
So like I would come home and I would, put the keys down or whatever, and then come the next day and I couldn't find the keys, and I would blow up, like absolutely furious, right? Now, back then, I was like, clearly it's the keys. But through the process of journaling, I realized that, like, no, to blow up like that because you're missing keys, there's something else there.
Mm.
Like what is it that's really bothering me? And I may find that, hey, I've been struggling with this thing at work that's really getting me down, and I maybe need to explore that a little bit more, and work through that. And so, now if, especially, with my wife, if her and I start coming into conflict about things, we very rarely is it the issue at hand. There's usually something else happening in the background, happening beneath the operating system that's causing us to lash out or to argue. And so for me personally, journaling has been key. The other thing is, talking about behavior modifications, behavior changes. Like I'm sure there are patterns that you do, that you're not even aware of that you do, right? And so, for me, there were bad habits that I had, and so when I was journaling and writing down, I was able to actually see those habits, those things that I wanted to quit doing, so that I could be a better version of myself. And let's say, let's say drinking. We'll go back to beer again, right? Like, drinking and fitness do not go hand in hand. And so, if you get in a habit of partying every weekend or drinking, watching football every weekend, whatever it is, and you're like, man, I need to kind of stop this. So one of the things that I would do in my journal is I would put an X next to every day that I didn't drink.
Mm.
And, my goal with that was to get 30 days with 30 X's. And so, anyways, I find it like this Swiss Army knife for all these aspects of our lives that we want to fix. Working out, that's another one. Write it down every day. What you do. That's what I do in mine is capture my physical activity for that day. And I can look and see, like, hey, I've been doing this now for 10 days straight. Maybe I need to take a break, or maybe I need to keep it going and I don't want to skip a day in my journal. So it's this really powerful tool that's helped me, with behavior modification. Like I said, watching those patterns, those things that I do that I was maybe unaware of, and then just really diving to the bottom of those things that are bothering me and kind of working them out on a piece of paper.
Mm. Can I give you a concept that I've been building and you can expand on it? You're gonna love this, I promise that. But I don't know the exact. So 1% change. 1% of your day is 14 and a half minutes. I just round up for simplicity. So 1% of your day is 15 minutes. That also means that, so let's say you want to make a 1% change. So let's say you want to read for 15 minutes a day, work out for 15 minutes a day, journal for 15 minutes a day. People are really busy and they're like, I don't have the 15 minutes. Well, what you do is you just take 1% of something that's making you bitter, something that's ruining you, and you just subtract that from your day. So then the 15 minutes present themselves just by erasing the 15 minutes at the bar, the 15 minutes watching Netflix, et cetera, et cetera. When you do the math, you've added 1%, you've subtracted 1%. In my, kind of pseudoscience here, I just made a 2% change.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually really change anything time allocation. I just allocated something better in the slot when I was doing something that made me bitter. And one thing I've learned, and I don't want to pass it to you, is like I was doing a lot of the right stuff personally. But when it came to drinking, when it came to binging on shows, when it came to thinking about porn or like distractions in my life, I was doing all the right stuff, but I kept on hitting plateaus because I was simultaneously doing all the wrong stuff. And probably if I was journaling, I could have identified that quicker.
Yeah.
I kept on wondering, like, why am I hitting these plateaus? I'm doing all the right shit. And I didn't realize the reason I was hitting the plateaus is because I was doing the wrong stuff. And you can talk about journaling because I know that lit you up. And I really would have probably figured that out quicker. But I'm also like curious, like, what are the good stuff you do? And then what are all the bad stuff that you've journaled and figured out and started to get rid of? Because if I had known this, I probably would have added years to my life of efficiency, and I just didn't.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of what you're talking about is like some of those things, like, for me, I'll go back to drinking. Like it's one of the things that I've almost completely carved out of my life. Like I'll do it, have social drinks on the weekends and stuff like that. But when I was in command, I was having one or two drinks at the end of every day just to kind of like, reduce the anxiety
Yeah.
of the day, which is again not great for your physical fitness. But it's really interesting because what I learned is that, by like as I write down how many hours of sleep I got, I capture my energy level. And what I found was the context for which I was making these daily decisions in. And so I could see that, oh man, like when I have a couple weeks of low energy, of, not good sleep, then I am more apt to make bad choices. And then I can start inserting things in there. Again, not always perfect, but doing the best I can. But inserting those things, whether it's a friend that can check on me, whether it's telling somebody that, hey, this is a goal I have. I'm gonna quit drinking for 30 days. You can just keep asking me about it. That'd be awesome. So it's a really good way to kind of understand like the context around a lot of those decisions. But I love this idea of, taking that thing that you're doing for 15 minutes. Cause I don't know about you, but I don't know of any time that I picked up my phone, got on Instagram and was able to get off 15 minutes later. And so, like 30 minutes later, I'm watching, funny videos or whatever. So I think that just, carving out the time. There's a quote from Seth Godin that I absolutely love, that was in one of his last books. He says, "You don't need more time. You simply need to decide." And, for me, like, I don't know what the type of work weeks your listeners have, but I was getting up at 4:45 in the morning. I was driving into work, being there by 6:15, and I wasn't getting home till 6 o'clock at night. And I was doing that 5 days a week. And also, I would go away for weeks at a time for training exercises across Europe. So, like, if I can do that and have time to sit down and read for a few minutes every day and journal for a few minutes every day, I think most other people could find that time too. And I had a family. I have a family. I've got two kids. So I'm also present for that too. So I'm not just locked in a dark room, like with a torch or a lantern journaling. Like I'm being present, being a part of the family too. So I think if I can find time for that, other people can find time to just try to take that 1% of their day, that 15 minutes, and do something, reading, writing, and reflecting with that.
It's a priority of yours.
Oh, huge, huge. And it could be anything, I think, for people. I think, you may have something. It'd be interesting. What's the thing that you do every day that kind of like sets you up for the day? Do you have something like that?
I do so much stuff. We could do a podcast on this. This was honestly one of my proudest moments just as a podcaster. But on Chartable, I noticed my podcast had ranked one above Hal Elrod, The Miracle Morning, his podcast. And Hal Elrod, I read his book in like 2015. And for now, almost 10 years, I've been doing my version of A Miracle Morning, which for anyone who doesn't know Hal and The Miracle Morning, the simple version is silence, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, scribing, which is just a funny word for writing because it spells savers. Drink a bunch of water. Basically, just do the stuff that you weren't doing when you were sleeping. So drink a bunch of water, get the body moving, get the brain started. So yeah, I've got a very strict morning routine. And that's part of why I bring up the 1% thing, is because I was doing a lot of stuff right, but I also had bad stuff going on. But yeah, that gives you a little background on my morning routine and a little humble brag that I was able to surpass Hal for about a day or two.
Yeah. First of all, congratulations on that.
Thanks, man.
But yeah, the morning routine for me is like super important. So I'll wake up and journal if I didn't do it the night before, and then I'll just quietly read. But having that quiet moment every single day before the house wakes up, before I get moving, has just been critical to kind of, finding my zen, collecting myself, and then I can go do whatever it is that I'm doing.
Cool. So you start off, well, let's talk less about us now. Let's talk about the listener. So a lot of the listeners, they're listening to this podcast. They're already educating themselves, but Let's talk to someone who feels like maybe they're not doing enough, or maybe they feel like called to get started. Like, we'll talk about reading and then we'll talk about writing. Like, how do I get started reading? I know that sounds like a dumb question to ask, but I didn't start reading personally till my 20s, so I don't think it's that dumb of a question. Like,
No.
if I'm not an avid reader, how do I prioritize that? What do I read? Why do I read? Like, how does that start?
Yeah. So, like on me too, like I was like, if anybody would have, told me or told my buddies in college that I would go on to, be an advocate of reading, writing, and reflection, they would have we would have all probably racked our brains trying to figure out like how do I get to that place in my life. So in my 20s, I was reading, but it was like the Harry Potter books as they were coming out and a couple
Yeah.
other books in there. But it was maybe two, three, five at most a year. Like that was it. It wasn't something that I prioritized at all. I was more interested in the latest Grand Theft Auto than
Fair.
I was like sitting down with a book. But over time, I just came to realize like in how important of a skill that is, a practice that is for leaders to do. And the reason why is because we basically have a single lens, especially leaders that come into any position with, especially when you're starting out. And that's, your parents, other authority figures in your life, teachers, coaches, all those things, movies, watching those people lead, and then you start leading, and then you get some experience, and that's really it. It's a single lens that you have, and it's very slow to develop over time.
Mm,
But when you read, all of a sudden you're tapping into the collected wisdom of thousands of years of leadership, wisdom, and you're able to start picking and choosing things, pulling things into those lenses, and you end up creating essentially a mental jukebox that you
mm,
can pull from as you encounter situations. Like there's one thing I used to talk about a lot, is that anytime we encounter something new, we say it's like I think I was telling you something, and immediately you were like, it's like this other guy I talked to that was on my show, Trucks.
yep.
It's going to be in the show notes,
Mm,
and so that's kind of how we figure stuff out in life, is we say it's like, and we a lot of times all we have to go back on is our experiences. But imagine like this entire library behind me, all of a sudden, you see a problem and you're just going through that Rolodex so quickly. And you're like, oh
mm-hmm.
man, it's like the time this thing happened at Disney Pixar. And this is what Ad Catmull did. And this is what I'm going to apply to this. Or this is like the time where, Ryan Holiday was writing about something Marcus Aurelius said. And then this is this. And so it helps you solve problems, or at least manage problems, a lot faster. So that's kind of what I learned. And I was like, okay, reading's really important. For the military, a lot of the books we have are very dry, they're
Mm,
very boring, but they're full of really good wisdom. And so what I learned to do was like, it's almost like crop rotation, is I started reading 3 to 5 books in a sitting. So let's go back to your
in a
15 minutes.
sitting?
Yeah, in a sitting. So just hear me out. So the 15 minutes that you're talking about,
Yeah.
you're reading one book and you're like, man, you get through a page, maybe two, and all of a sudden you find yourself start reading the same line over and over again. Now, typically, what a lot of us do, what I used to do, is I would put the book down, and then maybe a couple of days later, I would come back to it and be like, I've got to finish this damn book, and I'd pick it up again, get a couple lines in. It would take me 6 months to finish some of these books.
Hmm.
So then, when I would sit down with 3 to 5 books at a time, as soon as I started slowing down with the reading, I was like, okay, this is boring. I put it down, I pick up the next book and I start reading it. And, I'll get maybe 3, 4, 5 pages in, and I'll be like, okay, yeah, like same thing starting to happen again. I'll put it down and I'll switch to the next book. It's like channel surfing, while reading. And so
Is there science that works? Because to me, that makes me. Is that effective, my friend?
it is for me, because I
Yeah,
have a
fair.
highlighter, I
Yeah.
have a pen, and I'm going through, and like any book that I were to pull off this shelf, you would see highlights, you would see margin notes.
Mm,
And so I'm actively reading. I'm not just passively reading. And so, by putting the book down and coming back to it, I've got my highlights I can look at. I've got my notes that I look at. And, when I finish a book, a lot of times I'll take that book and go pick up a notebook and start writing down some of my favorite passages or some of the quotes that really spoke to me in that book. And so I'm constantly hitting that material over and over again, even after I put the book down. So for me personally, it's really effective.
It does make sense because you're also single tasking. And if you get bored with this, and there's a lot of science behind single tasking and taking breaks in between. So you could be single tasking on a book, take a break, which is normal, take a breather, and then you don't have to go back to single tasking the same task. You can choose a new task,
right,
but you're not doing 7 tasks at once. Part of why I was laughing and asking that question, because like I'll be watching like a informational YouTube video where I like brush my teeth, medicine, things like that. Then I'll listen to it, or before that, I read a book. Then I'll watch a YouTube video while I do some basic tasks. Then I'll put on a podcast in the car. And it's like I'm changing mediums. I'm changing discussions, but they are still all things that I'm learning, and I find benefit in it. So is it the best route? I don't know, but I think it actually works for me as well. So that's part of why I was asking about that.
Yeah, it works. And I think one of the important things in all of it is, this is a little like 3x5 notebook that I carry around with me everywhere. And, like I can go back and look, I've got notes here from like this page right here is July 18th, something that, something that I was like, oh man, this is awesome. Like I wrote it down. And then, if I'm sitting in the, grocery store line or waiting in a doctor's office or something, sometimes I'll just start thumbing through the notebook and start making connections. Like maybe a line from Walter Isaacson's Da Vinci, I marry that up with, something I read from Joseph Campbell. So it's just a really, really cool way for me. And I think I have a bent towards just learning. Like I get super passionate about learning things. So I don't know if it would work for everyone, but it definitely works for me.
Let's talk a little bit more about the writing. We've talked about journaling. We've talked about the fact it's not lame. There's actually benefits of journaling for leaders. But let's talk about getting started. Like, let's say someone doesn't have a practice yet. What do you recommend they do?
Yeah, so I focused my journaling efforts on, at one time, like when I got started too, I was like, what do I journal about? Because like, you have that image in your mind of like somebody sitting there like on the 14th of May, like whatever, like
dear diary.
Yeah, dear diary. But for me, and that's where I struggled with. Like I used Ryan Holiday's The Daily Stoic Journal. That was actually where I first started doing it, and I was answering the questions. And then I was like, this isn't what I want to write about. Like I don't want to write about this. I don't want to answer this Stoic question. Like that's not what I'm wrestling with today. What I'm wrestling with today is this thing. So I started with that, and then I came across a Peter Drucker article that I thought was pretty interesting, where he talks about like, how do you really know if you make good decisions? And he talked about this idea of writing a decision down that you made, a key decision or key action you did that day. And then you can, and he said actually to go and write what you think is going to happen. When you do that, I don't do that, but I'll write something down, and then you can go back and look, 6 months, a year from now, and be like, that was a really bad decision, but like, that's what I started doing. And then I started kind of getting a format in my daily journaling that just allows me to focus and dive right in. And can I share that with you? Like what
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So
every detail.
All right. So I will, have the date, obviously. And the first thing I write is, physical activity, kind of what I did. I also write how many hours of sleep I got, because I was finding that like when I, and this is probably like, this is like, common knowledge or whatever, but like if, my sleep was starting to deteriorate, everything else started to go with it, which, why that great book, Why We Sleep, kind of covers the science behind that. But I didn't read that till much later.
How do you track that? Do you have a band on you?
Yeah. So I wear a whoop.
Okay.
And like I wake up every morning, and like my health or like my recovery looks like an iPhone battery.
Got it.
So it's really cool too. Like if you want to quit drinking, like if you want to curb that, when you start waking up and you've only had like 2 or 3 drinks and it's red and it's like 22% and you know you're going into the day at 22%, personal iPhone battery, you're like, man, I got to stop this. So anyways,
That's why I don't wear one, because I admit it, like I'm kind of a crazy person. And if you
okay.
tell me I'm going in at 20%, something in me plays smaller. So I just like the ignorance is bliss concept. Not the best advice for
Right.
anybody. But if you were to tell me I'm at 10%, I'll be like pissed. And I
Yeah.
don't want to start the day bad. So that's literally why I don't wear one.
Well, and sometimes I do, but then like the other side of it, you
Yeah.
start getting excited. You're like, ooh, I got 8 hours of sleep tonight, or I got 7 hours of sleep
Mm.
tonight, and
Hmm.
I'm rocking a green, a 90% today. So that, so I write that down. And then I write like a daily summary of the day. I did this,
Yeah.
and this. Write down key decisions that thing you talked about. And it's really funny sometimes, like, hey, today I decided that I'm going to launch a podcast. All right. Like a couple years later, it worked out. There's other ones where I'm going to make this purchase, this impulsive purchase did not work out.
Mm.
So I'll write that stuff down. I'll write down stuff I learned, stuff I accomplished that day. A really important one for me is something I'm struggling with. And again, it allows me to work through it on paper. But again, it's really cool from a resilient aspect because I love going back a month, a year, whatever, and kind of looking at it and being like, man, I crushed that. Didn't think I would at the time, but it ended up crushing that. And then another important thing, and this goes back, I was doing it on and off, but gratitude, something you're thankful for. And what was really awesome, Haley's parents, the lieutenant that I lost, got when they got all of her stuff, they found, they had all of her journals, and Haley was one of the most, like her, just the aura around her was always super positive. She always seemed like happy, like just enjoying life. She journaled about gratitude every single day.
Mm.
So I know there's a lot of studies behind it, but I got to see it up close and personal. So that's something I always try to do in my journaling. Like the very last thing that I journal is that gratitude piece, something I'm thankful for. 'Cause it just kind of ends that little session on a quick note.
Yeah, great. That's between all of us, really. I was going to say between you and I forget we have listeners too.
Yeah.
That's what I'm writing every morning. I'm writing 3 to 5 things I'm grateful for. And if I can't think of something, literally all I have to do is open my eyes. Like, I'm
Yeah.
grateful to have this conversation. I'm grateful to be in this controlled environment studio that, not quite appropriate, but my buddy Steve Sims said the other day, he basically said, the things we have on our worst day is a wet dream for other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, our worst day is fantastic in comparison to what other people have to go through. And when you see that, and maybe you look at your band that I'm afraid to wear and it says 20%, it's still a freaking good day, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's an important thing too, is like when you start journaling about things that you're thankful for, all of a sudden, like you start looking for things to be thankful for.
Mm.
And I've learned, we probably both know some just people who are always negative, always unhappy. And, you could, hey, I got you a trip to Europe, and they're complaining the entire time, and so I think it's a really important thing to do, is to look at the things that are going well in your life and make sure that you're actually focused on those a little bit too, especially when you're journaling about things that you're struggling with.
So I wish we could do another 2 hours, but to sort of come to a close in just this chapter of your hero's journey and your part of the story. I mean, you just retired from the military. You're a writer now. You're a speaker. Like, tell us what is coming for the future, and what's more important is tell us how we can support you, Joe. Specifically, I want to know how I can support you in some of these future endeavors.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So it's awesome. So from the Green Notebook, just some background on that is it started out as my personal blog, and it some friends after a while started asking me, hey, can you publish this thing that I just wrote? And then people started emailing at me that I didn't know, asking if they could publish things on there. And then eventually I started having to ask, people that I knew if they would help me edit. And eventually we had a team of volunteers, and we have a daily, probably like 3 times a week, we have articles that go up on the website from military leaders from around the world. And so, one of the things that from the Green Notebook, I think we've published like 900 articles and have had, 2.6 million visitors since launching the site. Is it like, there's a lot of places you can go for leadership advice and wisdom, but you've got men and women in the trenches every single day, so to speak, who are having to practice leadership, who are reflecting on it and then writing it. And so, part of me is making sure this thing keeps going. The Army doesn't pay me, the military doesn't pay me. It's, we try to get sponsors when we can to help keep the website and the blog or the website and the podcast and the newsletters going. So I'll be working a lot with that. I'm working with doing some projects now with Ryan Holiday. That, he reached out to me before I retired and asked if I'd join his team. So I'm helping him with some stuff. And then, just my own writing, the hero's journey thing that we talked about, I spent 1.5 years writing it. So I've got this manuscript sitting on my computer right now that I need to publish. So that'll be coming out here probably the next 6-7 months. And yeah, just kind of enjoying my wife we were talking this morning, and she's like, when you come out of our home office, like every day, like, I don't know, like, it's like a new surprise, like a new opportunity, arises, and, it's just, you're going for it. So I had no idea we could do this interview a year from now, Ben, and things went completely south or they went in a completely different direction. I had no idea.
Well, your wife signed up for it. Your kids are along with the ride. That's just kind of how Joe's life looks like, it seems like, from the start. Changing.
Yeah.
Adapting.
It's great though. Again, super happy. I'm proud of my service. And, I think the other thing for me is, this concept of reading, writing, and reflection to help, get leaders better. It's something that's worked for me in the military. It's worked for a bunch of military leaders too. So if I can break outside of the military and start sharing that with, people like your listeners, it's something that I'm looking forward to doing.
Read more, write more, reflect more. Did we miss anything? I know we missed a lot, but
we got it all, man.
I think we knocked it out of the park. And if anyone was under a rock and hasn't met Joe yet, go subscribe to the Green Book podcast. Well, did I say it right? It's the Green Book podcast.
It's from the Green Notebook. And the reason
I knew I was saying it wrong. I don't know if you could tell. I knew I was like flubbing up there.
Yeah. So the reason it's from the Green Notebook, one is in the military, we have a government issued Green Notebook that we use.
Got it.
And so that's what, we take our notes in. So that's why it's called Green Notebook. But when I was doing this registering the site, like back in 2013, the Green Notebook was already taken. So I immediately went with from the Green Notebook. And so that's the name of the podcast and the website.
Yeah. So that Google it, go to the show notes. Don't unsubscribe here, but go subscribe there. Maybe you can multitask a little bit.
Yeah.
Like
we
like
talked
to
about
do.
that today too. So yes.
And I look forward to the next part of your journey, man. And maybe we'll bring you back, Joe. This was a ton of fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben.
All right. Talk soon.